when I usually speak about game masters or dungeon masters that I genuinely think are bad for the hobby, it's those kind of dungeon masters that are like creating lists of 10 terrible things a player can do, or 5 reasons why you're a bad game master and how to do it better, 4 reasons why your world setting sucks, 3 reasons why your session 0 is shit. It creates almost a competitive environment within people that are trying to get into the hobby. Doesn't matter if you're playing Aeon or Forbidden Lands, Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, Traveler, Starfinder, Call of Cthulhu, and all the other games that are out there, Dungeon Crawl Classics or so on. It doesn't matter. What these people are essentially doing is that they are creating a level of expectancy that is almost unrealistic most of the times. Every table is different, and each and every player will be different as well. If I play a game with my friends whom I've played with since I was a little kid, it's going to be drastically different to how I would play a game, for example, new individuals to a new tabletop game, or that are just new to tabletop games in general. Now, this individual, Ginny D, is a pretty large YouTube channel, and from what I can see here, I want to point out and go into their defense real quick. They say that, hello all, this is an old video. I don't stand by a lot of this stuff, so please take it with a grain of salt. Here are some videos that more accurately represent my current views and so on. Yeah, at least that they updated. I mean, I have uploaded videos in the past, I think, where, my opinion can shift on things. That being said, I do think that there is one point here that is at least very strong when it comes to online games and online game mentality. Playing games online is an entirely different beast than playing it in real life. For example, playing a game online, it can feel like an eternity if the players are stuck in a room for 5 minutes, not progressing onwards in the dungeon, as an example. Whereas in real life game, an entire session can take place in one room and time is a blast. It's different because, read facial expressions, you're there, and it creates a different sense of camaraderie rather than sitting in front of a computer. That being said, playing tabletop games online is a completely legitimate thing to do if that's what you prefer to do. I am just voicing my own personal opinion. Now, what Ginny D says in this video right here, I don't know if they still stand by this point, but I do think it raises a interesting question, that is removing player agency. I have been guilty of doing this in the past, and I just really want to, listen to what they have to say, react to it, and then, add my own tidbits to the whole kerfuffle, so to say.
The basic framework of a game like D&D is that the player controls their own character and the DM controls everything else. The rules are in place to make sure that everyone knows what they're allowed to do. But when the DM starts taking away the player's control over their own character, that can lead to a lot of tension. When I asked people about their worst experiences with DMs, some people told me about DMs that rolled their dice for them behind the DM screen, so they couldn't even see the numbers. I'm gonna pause there real quick. Now, some games use that as a mechanic. In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the game master would, for example, roll, let us say that there is a party of 4 and one decides to scout to see if they can, scouting is, never mind, scouting is that you will get a +1 to initiative, and then one is searching. So what the game master would do is that the game master would roll a secret perception check. They would ask the player, hey, what is your perception modifier? And then the game master would roll that and jot that down. And anything that befalls under, for example, let's say that the dwarf rolled a 27. Now, anything that is on the threshold of 27 or below, the dwarf would see. Let's say it's a pit trap that requires a perception of 20 to find. Then the dwarf can be like, "Hey, there is a pit right over there," and that's how it would work. But this is something that I actually agree with in one sense, that it's not a good thing. I think it sets the tone for you, the game master, not trusting your players.
So what I do in that stead is that I now have done so that everyone is going to state what they're going to do, what their exploration activity is going to be. And once that is done, they are going to roll individually. So that doesn't mean that, oh shit, the dwarf got a natural 1 on his perception check. Then someone can't just switch it up and say, well, since he got a nat 1, I want to go ahead and search as well, because we cannot go on with someone that rolled a 1. No, they're going to stick with that. And they're going to have that for at least an hour. So that's what I do. But I do agree to some extent of that. But let's move on with the video.
I heard about DMs who just refused to let players take certain actions that should have been within the rules, or would forbid players from creating certain races or classes.
Create certain races. I don't know if this was maybe misspoken, but I think it's a completely legitimate thing for a game master to say, no, you cannot create that race because that race does not exist in the world. Now, this also befalls if you've had a session 0. Well, you don't necessarily have to have had a session 0, but at the very least, the game master and the players should have communicated with each other, letting each other know, what world are they playing in? What is the setting? In my world, for example, in Pathfinder 2nd edition, I would probably not allow you to be a dragon, because being a dragon is not a player race, so to say. Moving on.
Of course, DMs can set their own house rules as long as they communicate them clearly to their players. But when this kind of thing happens a lot, players can stop feeling like they're participating and instead start feeling like their DM is just telling them a story that they have no say in. To controlling DMs, I just want to remind you, if you want to tell a story where you get to make every decision, you can write a book.
See, I don't like that. There's a difference between writing a book and telling a story together with your friends. Now, if you are an over-controlling game master, removing agency completely away from players, that is one thing. But if you have sort of like an essential story point that you really want to drive home, that is going to be the catalyst for the main campaign, and you don't really want the players to ruin it because you spent so much time working on it, you probably should, enter somewhat of a cutscene mode for that, and that is completely fine. I don't think that the whole ordeal of writing a book is a good argument either. I'm going to use an example. I played Starfinder a few weeks ago, and they were on a planet. And eventually the weather alarm went off, and they needed to do some tasks. I don't have my notes on me right now, but no need to get into specifics. The weather alert alerted, however, of a tornado that was coming, and checks were required to be made. Now, the players had plenty of time to, choose to not go out and help these colonies that needed their assistance. They knew for a fact that it was a deadly task. They also had to make, checks to see, can they see where they're going, because, the wind is blowing up a storm and dust is going everywhere and so forth. Eventually, the tornado got closer because it had a movement speed of a ridiculous amount. Either way, two people ended up being sucked into the tornado. Now, as the rules stated in the core rulebook of Starfinder, it says, that they need to succeed on a strength check, I believe it is. I don't have it at the top of my head. And then, if they fail that, we're going to roll 1d10, or is it 1d6? I can't recall. And if they get sucked into the tornado, they cannot do anything, and they take 6d6, I believe, points of bludgeoning damage each round. So let's say that you rolled a d10 and you got an 8. You're in there for 8 rounds, and there is nothing that you, the player, can do. However, other players would possibly be able to assist you in some way, somehow. But you are stuck in that tornado, and there's nothing you can do. Removing player agency is sometimes needed because the rules dictate that that is a thing. In D&D 5th edition, the players are very much used to being demigods walking around, being nigh impossible to kill and so on. It differs from game to game. To say that I should have just written a book rather than just have the player that was sucked into a tornado, oh no, I will allow you to make a reflex saving throw to get out of the giant tornado that you have been swept in, makes no sense. It is it is disingenuous towards my players, first off, if I would do something like that, to remove the sense of urgency and sense of danger, because they are on a dangerous mission. If you, the game master, are going to do everything within your power to keep the players alive and bend the confines of the rules just to do so, then you probably shouldn't be playing a tabletop game. Same argument as you probably should be writing a book, because there are rules. The players have hit points for a reason, and there are dangers out there for a reason. Now, if I, the game master, were to throw a tornado on a bunch of level 1 characters, for example, I would have probably been a very bad game master for doing that. Then there are also different situations of, let's dive into 5th edition Curse of Strahd, where Strahd harasses the party several times throughout the campaign and is this constant, omnipresent threat wherever they are in Barovia. And let's say that Strahd just decided, he was extra bloodthirsty this one time. And eventually, the players do not back down, they do not try to flee, and neither does Strahd. One player dies. What you have successfully created there is, well, first off, one dead character and one traumatic event, which will lead to that the players, or the characters, more likely, will have a deeper anger and a stronger reason to want to defeat Strahd, because they killed our cleric Joseph or something of the sort. Taking away player agency is sometimes essential for the story to unfold, and it is completely fine if it is within the confines of the rules. That's what I think. Moving on.
But when you choose to run a tabletop game, you're signing up for a collaborative storytelling experience. Your players need to feel like their decisions matter, or they'll stop caring about the game. I think the key to this is letting go of the idea that you can control where the plot goes. I know it can be hard to loosen your grip on the reins, but laying out a situation and then being curious and interested in what your players will do with it can be really fun.
I'm gonna have to stop right there. She is, or they are, I don't know their pronouns, but she is correct, or they are correct, when it comes to say that, hey, you guys are telling a story together, and that is true. The players are there with you to tell a story, but you need to remember the game master is also there playing, okay? And the game master is essentially the arbiter of what is going to happen. And the game master sometimes will have to enforce limitations of what will happen. Or sometimes the game master will have to enforce situations that will lead to situations where players are not as free to act as they usually are. Am I a bad game master, for example, having my players at some points shackled because they try to rob a magic store? And that these shackles are magical shackles that just makes any kind of magical item on them non-functional, and they are no longer able to tap into their divine magic or any sort of arcane magic. And these shackles are also enchanted in the sense that they are unbreakable. Now, these characters are going to be transported from point A to point B. Am I a bad game master for doing that? No. I am telling a story that unfolds because of the player's actions and the consequences that follow with it. There is a difference between saying that you are completely removing player agency. For example, if I were to have a self-insert character come in and save the day at every given moment, that would probably be pretty shitty, in all honesty. If I were to constantly say to characters, no, you do not do that, your character does not think that, then that would also be bad removal of player agency. But sort of like imprisoning your characters and let them face the consequences of their actions and let them feel that there's a sense of danger is part of the experience. It is part of telling a story. It is part of playing a tabletop game. If you do not want any kind of consequences that are negative towards you when playing a tabletop game, you shouldn't really play a tabletop game, in all honesty. Let's hop on over to the next part, which is they abuse their powers. So let's see if it's about game masters that abuse their powers.
DMs have a lot of power. Like, that's kind of the job. And just like any position of power, it's super important that this power not be abused. One of the ways DMs wield power is secrecy. Players don't always know what a DM rolled, or how many monsters are lurking in the shadows, or what sort of magic items or special abilities an NPC or villain might have. This system works because players trust that their DM is going to use that secrecy honestly and in good faith. Now, many DMs fudge rolls or make adjustments to their plan to better suit what's playing out at the table, but if a DM is regularly lying about their rolls, inventing reasons that player actions don't succeed, and just generally moving the finish line continuously out of reach, that's an abuse of power.
So is it also an abuse of power if the game master fudges rolls to the benefit of the players? Does that work two ways, or is it that we're constantly working towards achieving the players' goals? Curious.
Also, DMs know everything about their players, their passive perception, their armor class, their resistances. But if a DM regularly builds scenarios specifically to avoid their players' strengths, that's shitty too. Your players are allowed to win sometimes. They're allowed to have a clever idea that pays off. It's not fair to ask that players follow the rules, but not demand the same thing from the DM.
If I were to create an encounter, and let's say that this series of encounters is specifically against my set of players, I know their resistances and I know their weaknesses, and this entire encounter or series of encounters is going to be based upon that. I don't think that's shitty. That forces the players and the characters to think outside of the box, which is also a thing that is essential to tabletop role-playing games. So I don't necessarily agree there.
If there's a leader at the D&D table, it's the DM. That's a role that you accept when you sit behind the screen, and it comes with its own duties. If there's a problem player, it's the DM's job to handle it. If there's a conflict, the DM should be involved in resolving it.
I highly disagree. If there is a problem player, yes, of course, it befalls somewhat on the game master to try and, deal with that situation. But that also befalls the players. The players are also playing the game. They need to be the ones that voice their concerns as well. To put everything on the game master is just unfair. When I am a game master, that doesn't mean that I am someone's parent, constantly telling them, you cannot do that. You need to stop doing that. They did not appreciate when you did that thing. That is not my job. The players also need to communicate with each other. To put everything on the DM is just completely stupid.
Now, I don't want to imply that players don't have any responsibility for their own interpersonal problems, but if players are clashing, or if someone is behaving poorly during sessions, having the DM's support can be incredibly helpful.
Now, yes, having the game master support can definitely be helpful in solving situations. But to say that the game master is the one responsible to go into that, I don't necessarily agree, as I previously stated. It also depends. Like, I want to imagine, at least at my table, we're all adults sitting down playing these tabletop role-playing games. Adults need to be able to communicate with each other, because the entire thing about playing a tabletop game is about communication. If you are unable to do that, you probably shouldn't play TTRPGs.
I have heard way too many stories about people who were bullied or mocked or harassed by another player and got zero backup from their DM. That's the kind of thing that drives someone away from a game.
Okay, so they were bullied and harassed by the game master, but did none of the players stand up for them? Was that person that was bullied and harassed by other players maybe the problem player? I don't know. Like, asking questions. They reject feedback.
I get it, it can be hard to hear criticism. I don't think anybody actually likes being told that they're doing something that somebody doesn't like. But if you aren't willing to hear what is and isn't working for your players, they might just leave instead. A great first step is to just ask. At the end of your sessions, ask your players to tell you both what they liked about the session and what they didn't like.
I agree. That is a very, very good tip. That is something that I actually do most of the time, is that I ask, hey, what did you guys enjoy? What do you want to see improved? What do you want to see less of? What do you want to see more of? And so on. That is a good tip. I will give you that.
But remember, a lot of people say they want feedback, but still get upset when they receive it.
Oh, I know that. That also befalls players. Good God, that befalls players.
It's part of the DM's job to play villains, to play monsters, to embody the roles of the party's enemies. But just because the DM is the character's enemy doesn't mean they have to be the player's enemy. The DM's goal shouldn't be to defeat their players. It should be to create a game that everyone enjoys. And that includes being a challenging opponent, of course, but it doesn't include being an asshole. No matter how cruel their NPCs might be to their players' characters, the DM should never be cruel to their players. Nearly everything on this list can be solved with a good, thoughtful session zero and the use of safety tools. You don't even have to come up with all this stuff on your own. So many people have provided guidance on how to create a gaming table where everyone feels safe and comfortable, even while their characters are in mortal danger. I'll link to a few good resources in the description.
Okay, I am just gonna say my final thoughts on this as well. Don't become the player's enemy. It's a little bit of a double-edged sword, because as a game master, like she said, you represent the villains, the bandits, the monsters, the aberrations, the demons, the fiends, the space pirates, the anomalies, and so on. But you also represent, their allies and other NPCs and so on. And it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, because if you have written a character that is legitimately evil, legitimately, let's say, full-on chaotic evil, batshit insane, and all that jazz, you would be doing yourself and that NPC or villain a disservice, and the players a disservice, if they suddenly were to I am not going to kill you now, I am going to bide my time. Even though this individual has been known for, destroying entire villages because they felt like it, and this is just something that is completely off what they would normally do just because there are players there. That makes no sense. Don't necessarily agree with that. It is hard to be a game master. It is hard to balance between being, the player's enemy and be the player's friend. What you need to be, however, is that you need to once again be the arbiter of rules. You are going to use the rules whenever things get, really tense and so on. Look back to the rules. Another thing that I think is important at the very least to point out is that if you have an evil character and you're playing that evil character, make sure the players know that it's the evil character, not the game master, and don't make the evil character be your own self-insert. Make that evil character be something else, something that drives the player towards wanting to lock them up, defeat them, or banish them, you name it. And you can use traumatic events as motivation for it if you so want to, but it doesn't necessarily make you a bad game master for having the BBEG or big bad evil guy kill one of the players, kill one of their loved ones, entrap one of the player's souls, yada yada, you name it. There is nothing wrong with that. The game master should work with the players to help them achieve the goals that they want to achieve, but they should also present obstacles that the players may or may not overcome. And if they do not overcome those, that doesn't make you a bad game master. That just makes the situation they were unable to move past this obstacle. What happens next? All right, that was it for me. It's been a while. Peace.